Hey everyone, PPL Adult Program Coordinator William Eckert with you again. And today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to step outside the library, we're going to step outside the Zoom technology, and we're going to do an interview with a local author, Tim Strong, owner and operator of Birch Bark Books. And I'm going to take you on this trip with us, and we're going to do it with the use of a couple of GoPros that we've gotten through the Northern New York Network Action Grant. And that we've been utilizing for our PPL on the Outside program. So we're trying something a little new. Bear with us. We want to take you on this trip. So get ready to strap in and let's go for a ride.
Guys.
That's all right. How are you?
Good, thanks.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm glad you came over. Hi there.
So Tim, you know, I'm a regular here. I'm coming in every other weekend at least, and so this is very exciting for me to be able to sit down and talk to you about your novel, and you know, at a greater length than when I'm stopping in. So, thank you for taking the time to do this. You've been running Birch Bark for 33 years, and you know, stacking these shelves with authors from centuries to, you know, more recently. You know, how does it feel now to have a novel of your own among them?
Well, it's really a dream come true. I've been trying to get it published for almost 25 years, and off and on, trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher, and finally I did. And it's a big thrill, it really is, to be able to say, yeah, this is my book, and share it with other people and listen to what they say. Like you gave me a real good commentary on you left me a phone message. So that it's just a big thrill.
So Tim, 25 years working on this book. You know, why don't you tell me a little bit about where the inspiration for the book came from, and then and talk to me. You know, I've read it, but for those who haven't, you know, a little bit about the story arc, a little bit about you know, where this story is going to take them, and its characters in it.
You know, part of all fiction, I think, is nonfiction too. It's a blend of the two things. And the parts about the mental illness in the book are highlighted, I think, to describe what stigma does to people who have mental illness. And I think you see that in the characters, what happens to them and how they respond, and that sort of thing hopefully keeps the reader wanting to turn the page after page and keep going.
I had read an essay not long ago by Neil Gaiman. It was a 2013 reading agency lecture, Why Our Future Depends on Libraries, Reading, and Daydreaming. And he writes that reading fiction is a gateway drug to reading. He says the drive to know what happens next, to want to turn the page, the need to keep going even if it's hard because someone's in trouble and you have to know how it's all going to end. And he kind of further goes that, you know, the purpose of reading fiction is really also gives us a sense of empathy. And I read your book before I read that essay, and I couldn't help but immediately think of your book. You know, thinking of the character Sam and you know, his friends, and kind of the things and the struggles they're going through, and they seemed very real. They seemed, as I was reading the book, you know, and you start falling into these struggles, you kind of want to see these characters kind of overcome them so they can almost go back to the story arc before these troubles came into their lives. And I think that in the sense of empathy, it really, it seemed to, you seemed to capture all of those things that that Neil Gaiman was talking about, that urge to turn the page, to find out what's going to happen next, and to care about these characters. And that, you know, like the characters themselves, you wish that everything could go back to the way things were before these troubles came into their lives. You know, what kind of tools did you have at your ready to craft a story like this, to put this together, to really make the reader as engaged as you have?
I had a professor when I went to college at Plattsburgh State University, and I took a creative writing course with him. And one of the things that always stuck with me was something he called coiled motive. Mm-hmm. And it's like if you imagine a spring and you keep compressing it until something lets go. And that's really what I do with the characters. I keep putting more pressure on them. And then, you know, as part of the creative ability, you know, something has to pop eventually. And that's what happens in the book, is that, you know, you go from one section to another, and a lot of it, you just keeps adding pressure, and then the pressure's resolved or extenuated, and then you keep going on and on like that.
There are a lot of different caveats to this story and challenges that these characters face. But the main one is that you have a character who's coping with and learning to live with and navigate his life through mental illness. He has a psychotic episode, and it's something that lives in his life. You know, tell me a little bit about like where your inspiration for talking about this topic, because you really, I mean, I read this and frankly have never really thought about it in such a way that was really so nuanced, that really has you at a point where you're looking at this through the character's eyes and really beginning to better understand what it might be like to have these illnesses.
Like I say, part of fiction is nonfiction, and the characters are made up, like Sam and George, they're made up of different people that I've known throughout the years. And then they, you know, it's almost like a discovery that, oh, this mental illness does this to you and that to you. And, you know, hopefully the reader will understand a little more about how harmful stigma is to anybody who's mentally ill, because that makes it very tough for them to come back into the social setting after they've been hospitalized. So I think it makes a difference.
What kind of homework did you do on kind of, you know, on the study of mental illness, or kind of, you know, like have you had conversations with people about this? Is this something that, you know, to really kind of flush this out? Because you did a, I mean, really remarkable job of putting us in this character's perspective.
Well, a lot of it's combinations. Mental illness is in my family, and they, you know, that's one of the things most people don't understand, is that mental illness can be passed down from one generation to the next, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like you're weak-minded or something like that. It's, you know, it's the same thing that, you know, cancer is passed down in families as well. So I used what had happened to my family and my own experiences and kind of combined them into what Sam is like, the main character.
Another thing that I think that all writers probably experience is when they are writing their characters out and drawing these stories out, and creating these circumstances, a lot of the situations that you find your characters in are difficult ones. What kind of, like, for you emotionally and working through these and creating these circumstances for these characters, I mean, what was it like for you to put this out? Because, I mean, every time we create a character, we're bringing a life into the world in a way, right?
Right.
And to make those decisions to kind of put them through certain types of struggles. What was it like for you to be able to make these decisions, to put these struggles into your characters, and kind of, what does that make you, how does that make you feel when you're putting that together?
It's hard sometimes to explain the creative process. When I was at SUNY Binghamton, I had another professor that was Larry Wywoody. He's the poet laureate of North Dakota now. And what he taught us was do a page count. Say, like, on a yellow pad, set it up so you're going to do 3 pages a day or 4 pages a day, and always leave the writing where you know what's going to come next. So that process gets the creative juices going, but it gives you a way forward as far as composition. Yeah. And that really worked well for me, being able to do page counts.
Did you find there were any points, putting, Sam through some of his, his struggles, and as you're writing them down, did you find that it affected you emotionally? Like, obviously some of the hardships that he was faced with, and some of the hardships that his characters were faced with as well.
It seems very real to me. I mean, I hope that the reader feels the same way, because it's a struggle, when you create these characters, to be true to them, so that, again, so the reader believes what they're reading, and that it takes time, and because at one point this novel was 100 pages longer. Wow. than it was. And when I finally got an agent, one of the people that worked for the agent, she was a woman. She really liked the book, but she thought it should be, about 100 pages less. And so that was really hard to do, to cut 100 pages out of these characters' lives. But I think she was right. I think it's a better book for doing that.
They say that the hardest part of writing is the editing process, right? You can write all the words down and get all the story down, and then when you go back to it, you get a situation like that. Yeah. How do you decide to what to cut out of their lives?
Well, actually, I've had for this book, I've had different readers, like the professor I had in Plattsburgh and the professor I had that's in North Dakota now. They read the book, and I sent them, just a loose leaf copy of it, and I included a red pen when I mailed it to them, and said, put the red ink to it and let me know, So they were very good about doing that. And then the publisher, when I finally got together with them, they helped me too to change it and mold it into something that was better than it was before.
What was that process like for you? I mean, like, going through that, obviously, when, you put that much of yourself into a story and your experiences into a story, and that kind of emotion and love into a story. When people come back to you and say, well, this part could probably go, obviously, you need to have a level of open-mindedness, but how do you feel like that process shaped you as a writer?
It's kind of like two opposite ends playing against the other. You have to take what you know and what you believe, as opposed to, creating some good dialogue and some scenes and things like that. And when I had to cut those 100 pages, it was like pulling teeth, I'll tell you. But I wanted to get the novel published, and they were giving me a chance to do that. So I had to trust, their expertise as to what direction to go with different parts of it.
Tell me a little about the store itself for the folks that may have not been here before, and in this really sanctuary for me of books, how much being here has been an inspiration on you as a writer?
Well, it's been 33 years, and since I received my master's degree, I probably have 25 other publications of short stories, poetry, and that kind of thing. And working with the books every week, I look at it, there's 75,000 books here, and I think there's 75,000 friends that I have that I can look at I can open up and read and put them back on the shelf. And then it's such a pleasure for people to find books that they really want and get excited about it, which happens every week. People, they're so pleased that they found something that they can take home and enjoy. And they like the setting of the store. So it's between the writing and the being a shopkeeper, they blend very well together for me. So I have customers that came when I first opened, and now they've got married and they've had kids, and the kids come, and the kids love there's lots and lots of kids books upstairs. So I get to see now, at this later stage, I get to see the grandchildren come. So I've got 3 different generations of people, and oh yeah, we want to go to the store, we want to show the kid, all that. And that's what gives me a great warm feeling to know that the store's been that much of a success that it means a lot to people, and how they take it and how they communicate about it.
You said that it was 25 years that you've been trying to get this book published. I want to go back even a little bit further than that. Tell me, how long have you had this story for Whippoorwill Chronicles? How long have you had this story in your head before you even put pen to page?
I guess it's an evolution more than in a process of bringing all the different things together, and over the years they've accumulated, and then when I actually sat down to write the book, I was ready to go. I mean, I didn't have a hard time at all writing it. Like you said before, it's tougher to edit than it is to write, especially again with doing 3 pages a day or 4 pages a day, keeping to that. It's a good regimen to write a novel, and I think anybody could try and write a novel based on those kinds of things.
Now, you selected a few sections from the book to read for us. I was wondering if you would maybe read a little bit from the book for us.
Okay.
If you tell us a little bit about what you're reading and why you selected it.
It's really a love story between Sam and Dolores, their relationship. But because they're young. I mean, she's only 15 and he's 17, so that it's kind of, they're still trying to figure out their emotions, what love is and what love isn't. So that's why I thought I'd read this passage about when they find out that Dolores is pregnant and her parents decide to have an abortion. It just tears them up, I mean, they just don't know how to deal with that. I mean, they're so young and immature. So, but this is just a short section on, they ran away to be together because she was being stigmatized the same way Sam was. She was stigmatized because she had an abortion, and some people are against that, some people are for it, or they have mixed emotions. So I'll just read a little bit of that. I fell in love with Dolores Prairie during 3 short days. Maybe I'd been on the edge of it for a long time, or maybe this was the perfect situation for it to happen. But an instinct pegged this as love, a truth I'd been searching for all my life. While she slept, I wrote a letter to George about the ocean and my newfound love for Dolores, and other things, like what kind of rifle he carried and how much I wanted to see him before he left overseas to Vietnam.
When you introduced Dolores in the book, there was a great. I mean, I talk about like his feelings for her being pretty intense, but also kind of like in the way you punctuate it. There was something where he says, "I met her next spring. Period. Finally. Period. Already." Already my junior year, almost over, I'd begun to think no girl would ever want me. Seriously. And it was a girl lots of other guys were after too. She was cute and cuddly and warm and soft. And she could kiss. Winter was over and the spring had started. I was 17, had just gotten my night license. What a time to be in love. Dolores.
Yeah, that's a good description of her.
It was. I mean, I read that and I thought, it was a fantastic introduction. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of, putting together the punctuation in this book? Just how strong you make the sentences, and how, like certainly, like the fact that you're like, I met her next spring, period, finally, period. Like, you're just, you're really like making these things, and just even her name is a sentence alone. I mean,
Yeah.
there is something to that, I think.
It's trying to define the creative process, and I don't think I have the ability to describe it. I just know that it's there, and I just keep piling on the sentences. And then, of course, then when you go back and do the editing process, you can refine it. And like I say, I had such good readers, that were helping me to make it a lot better. I'm not trying to evade your question, but it's just I don't know how to describe it.
Sure. You had something else that you had picked out for us to read.
Yeah. This is later in the novel, and the mental illness has been a big factor for probably 50 or 60 pages. So this says, I sat and tried to figure out if mental illness was some kind of weird forgetting, and if when the mind becomes too sick, at some crucial point it shuts down. It seemed like this is what had happened to me. Maybe it was like shock. I heard of people with broken arms and legs from car accidents that remembered the accident in slow motion, tiny details, but not the pain until someone triggers them back. Mind shock, and maybe that's how I'd lost 2 weeks. A short circuit, 2 crucial mind wires touching in the mass of all the jangled up nerves. A break so I didn't know a goddamn thing while they healed enough to function again. Batshit, my grandfather used to say when something confused him. Definitely batshit.
And one of the things that I found enjoyable and fascinating is that, this takes place during the Vietnam War. You really utilize pop culture quite a bit, talking about music and things like that. Would you tell me a little bit about your how you've gone through the process of selecting some of the pop culture references that you make? Music is a big part of this.
I was too young to be a hippie, but I saw people around me that were hippies, and of course that was a big conflict with the war in Vietnam. And then of course all the music with the Doors, the Rolling Stones, the Chicago, all those different groups, the songs become to mean something for the characters. And I just kind of kept melding that in because, most people recognize those musical groups as being really famous. So with that, I was able to blend in really the culture of the 60s, even though the book is set later than that. So because like when George enlists to go to Vietnam, I mean that sets up such a horrible conflict, because one of the things, I don't think it gives away too much of the book, one of the things that happens in the very near the beginning is that George, the older of the two, saves Sam from drowning. And then that sets up, again, the pressure on the characters that Sam always thinks that he owes George a life because he saved him. And George is much more practical and says, well, you wouldn't feel like that if you had saved me. And you can kind of think, well, yeah, maybe. But I think it makes the readers think about, what is it that happens that we owe other people, or do they owe us? And probably in the end, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's Sam's problem, and he has to work that out. And I think during the course of the book, you see him working that out in different stages of realizing, I mean, just because George saved him from drowning doesn't mean that he owes him a life. I mean, but that's the way he twists it, and it causes a mental illness because he's in such conflict with reality that, he has to deal with it somehow, and unfortunately he becomes mentally ill partially because of that.
I'm always curious with a writer's craft, some of their methods. Do you have any habits or methods when you're sitting down to write? I mean, people have different things that they do when they're writing. Are there any like habits of yours? Hemingway used to stand up when he would write dialogue, because he thought, back and forth conversation is like boxing, and you can't box sitting down. Do you have things like that? Do you have things that you do when you sit down to write, things that you need, things that you rely on?
Well, the biggest thing is that it's almost like a trick. Is like I said before, if you do a page count every day, and you leave yourself a spot where you know what the next sentence is going to be, it's hard to resist that. It's hard to not go, well, my page count's 3 and I'm done here, and I think I could write 2 more pages right now. But the professor said you have to have the discipline of some, like being able to put it in a box and say, okay, this is this little bit, and then the next day you say, okay, I'm ready to go again. And that worked for me so well, just that structure, within that structure of writing a novel. So it was good. It was a good thing.
People like myself read the book and come to you with questions and want to learn more about the insight. But for you, what about this book did you find to be most important to you? What do you want readers to know about this? Your personal takeaway, someone who's written it, and writing it and reading it and making it exist. What for you was probably the biggest takeaway for this book, and really what stays with you?
I think the biggest thing is that the characters, when Dolores and Sam and George and Lois, his girlfriend, it's that search for love. And even when you find just little bits of that seem really true, that's important, because you're understanding a concept that's almost indescribable. I mean, love can be described in so many ways, but there's no one way. It has to be a combination of different things. Where you live, what your upbringing was, what the girl's upbringing was, and all those things that, they have an effect. And that's where it goes, I think.
Now, this is your first novel, but it's not your first publication, as you mentioned, and it's not the first full publication that you have on the shelf. You also have your book of poetry, All the Echoes.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about, the creed, because I read through this as well, and again, it was really strong. I mean, the emotionally, I think I was able to, to feel this. It was dedicated to your mother. Do you want to talk a little bit about the, your creation of this book of poetry?
That's a combination of a lot of different time periods. It's in a way it follows the novel in poetic form, and I like the way I set up the spacing so that at the top of the page at the beginning of a poem, there's a succinct little emblem, and then it goes into the poetry, and then at the end there's a summary, just a few words, 3 or 4 words of what the poem was like. And I don't know how I came up with that. I've read a lot of other poets, and I've never seen it done like that before, with that kind of spacing and tagging the subject for a conclusion that makes sense. And that's how those poems were written, a lot of them. And because I could write off, if I had that introductory sentence, everything comes out of that, and then again the summary at the end. So that's how that book was written.
Even reading Whippoorwill Chronicles, you can, throughout reading that, and I look again, going to the punctuation, some of your writing style is very poetic. And I was going to ask, like the, putting together these 2 books, you're looking, you one of poetry, but doing it in sort of like that, looking at a novel sort of fashion, but even a novel that has a tinge of the poet's tongue in there. Do you find that, you're putting poetry in novelization from time to time? I'm like, in the sense of like you're writing a story, a novel, and you find yourself stopping and going like, oh, well, turned out to be a little more of a poem than it was actually sort of a story arc.
I don't think that wasn't my experience with it. Again, it goes to, trying to answer what creativity is and where it comes from. I mean, I wanted to write books ever since I was 5 years old. And I remember, like with friends, we'd write these little mysteries or these different types of books, even when we were, before we were 10 years old. And I don't know, I can't tell you why I decided to do that. It was just something I was born with almost, that I had a story to tell and I wanted to share it with other people. And the poetry, some of the poetry in all the echoes deals with mental illness and, what life is like in an asylum and all those things. And part of it's experience, is actual experience, and part of it is that creativity, how to get it over to the reader in the best possible fashion.
Someone who's been wanting to write since he was 5 years old, and having 2 books on your shelves here, do you have another one in the making?
Yes, I have. The novel that I wrote for the novel writing class at SUNY Binghamton was my first novel, and that's the one I'm working on now. I'm editing it because what they say that it's like with before when I was getting short stories and poetry publishing, then the transfer over to be able to write the first novel I wrote, and that novel is set during the 1980 Winter Olympics. And again, there's two good friends, and I don't want to give too much of the story away, but they follow along with the Olympics and the pressure of the Olympics and all the tourists and Lake Placid and all that, because I was there, I was in Lake Placid when the Olympics were held. And so I have all those really strong images of, watching the downhill skiers and watching Eric Heiden. He won 7 gold medals in that Olympics. And I saw Heiden get his 7th Olympic at the ceremony, and it was really wild. And I got to see a couple of the hockey games, but I didn't get to see the one where the Americans beat the Russians. But that's a big part of that book. It's kind of the culmination of, the Americans beating the big bad Russians, that everybody in America heard about. So that was a thrill to write that book. But I feel it was almost in preparation for Whippoorwill Chronicles, because I've done the same thing. I've got a woman that I know very well, and I've got my professor from Plattsburgh State. They have copies of the book Peace Lies Within now, and again, I sent them a red pen and said, sock it to it, because then that'll help me to get the edit, so that's where I'm at now with that book.
And when can we expect to maybe see that one on your shelves?
Well, what my agent says is that you have to get a track record, so that what Whippoorwill Chronicles is published by an independent publisher, and they're very reputable. They're a good publisher, but they're not like Doubleday or St. Martin's Press. So the agent said, well, after 2 years, we'll see if you've built up a good track record, and then we'll make an appeal to one of the mainstream publishers. And I've already sold over 100 copies of Whippoorwill, so I'm getting a track record, and I hope this interview helps to give me an improved track record, that get the word out there.
Well, we do too. I really can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and talk about it. I mean, it was like I said, it was a great book to read. It was incredibly intense. That's the word that kept coming up in my mind as I was reading it. The intensity of the book, and kept ratcheting up, and again, really cared about the characters. And it's it's always a pleasure to actually know the man behind the words. So thank you for agreeing to sit down and talk with us about your book. And I know it must have been a very personal journey as well as kind of an exploratory one.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.